When you hear about the business of pickleball, you probably think it's been the fastest growing sport for the last 3 years. The pros are making a ton of money. But what if I told you that it's on the brink of collapse? And while that's a slight over-exaggeration, I'm mainly referring to the PPA and pro pickleball as a whole. And to understand this story and how we got here, we have to go back a few years. Now, pickleball has been around for a while. Ben Johns and Tyson McGuffin have been dueling it out since essentially 2016, but the story really starts in 2019. And in the last few years since then, we see exponential growth in the popularity of pickleball. And a bright man named Connor Pardo, now the CEO and founder of PPA and MLP, which are now under one entity, he started the tour in September of 2019, as we can see here. And his vision was essentially to unite the best players in the world to a single tour. Now, when he did this, he was essentially not much older than I was, right? He's 23 or 24 when he started this back in 2019. And with any good startup or any startup in general, you kind of have to figure it out on the fly. And one of the things that the PPA did really, really well was acquiring sponsors. One of those sponsors, their premier sponsor being Carvana back in 2022. When they announced this was the premier sponsor, but pickleball looked a lot different 3 years ago than it does today. I mean, even if you want to look in your screen, that court where you see Carvana as kind of the only sponsor on court, if we take a look today, at a pickleball court, we're going to see 15 different sponsors on the video board and the sideboards. So it's grown a lot since then. And in your mind, you may be going, oh, well, that's a really good thing. That shows, economic growth within the PPA. And that's so true, but that's not the full picture. And still to this day, as it was 3 years ago, sponsors are the biggest revenue driver for the PPA tour, and it's something they do really well. But also, this means they have to pick good sponsors and deliver for them. And as we can see with Carvana, that didn't exactly happen. Carvana almost went bankrupt in 2022 when they were the premier sponsor of the PPA Tour. And it's since, kind of pulled back. We don't see those Anna Lee water commercials with Carvana anymore. But all this to say that picking sponsors and delivering for them isn't as easy as it sounds, and the PPA's definitely had problems with that as well. But the PPA learned, and they grew, and they diversified their sponsorship base. Now, if they scroll down their website, they have premier sponsors, they have gold sponsors, they have silver tour sponsors. I mean, they got it all. Totaling to over 70 sponsors now on tour versus, the mere 15 they had a few years ago. But that's only one slice of the pie. And the second biggest revenue driver is the tournament registrations, right? How to run good tournaments. And this first starts with your top players, right? Your Anna Lee Waters, your Ben Johns, your Gabe Tardios. And this is something they've also nailed. They have the best players in the world on their tour and exclusive to their tour, which they take very, very seriously. But this is where the problem really started. And it was in 2022/2023 when the MLP, the APP, and the PPA were all fighting for these top players to come to their tour. Because back then, it wasn't solidified that Anna Lee Waters was going to end up in the PPA, that Tyson McGuffin wasn't going to go to the APP or MLP and not play in the PPA, right? That wasn't a fact. And the cost of getting all those players was very, very expensive because think about it. From the player's perspective, they have so much leverage. They can go to the PPA and say, hey, APP, they just offered me $300,000 over 3 years to go play on their tour exclusively. Can you beat it? And the PPA almost has to say yes if they want to be the premier pickleball tour in the entire world. So that was a key component of this story. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, they won the Tour Wars. They merged with MLP. They got all the best players in the world. And that's half true. But the other half of the story is what about all the players that signed and aren't really providing value? They're just dead weight. I mean, look at down this list, right? We have Lindsay Newman. She hasn't played a PPA event in years. She signed a long-term contract back during Tour Wars that set her up really well financially for the next 3 to 5 years. This is dead weight from the PPA. And this story is not exclusive to Lindsay Newman. Alex Newman, another good example, right? Travis Rettenmeier. Who is going to the PPA with the fact in their mind that they want to watch Travis Rettenmeier play on court, right? He is a good influencer, a really good job on the social media side of business. But him, Alex Newman, Anderson Scarpa, no one's going to a PPA and getting the value that the PPA paid for them 3 years ago. This is as dead weight for the PPA and creates a huge financial issue. So what is the issue? Well, it's a cash flow issue, right? They gave all these players guaranteed money back 2 years ago, and a lot of money at that they probably weren't worth, and now they're stuck having to deliver on those contracts. And to deliver on those contracts, they're not driving in enough revenue from these sources, right? The media rights aren't really there yet. This is where TV deals become a huge revenue source for every other major sports league. PPA, not there yet. Gambling is a huge revenue driver for sports, and PPA and pickleball in general is not there yet. So this is really leaving us with small shares of the total sports pie that we're drawing revenue from through the PPA, right? Ticket sales. Not many people are going to these MLP PPA events on a week in, week out basis, and not even to mention the cost of basically traveling a circus, which the PPA is doing, and all their setup expenses and personnel, both temporary and full-time, that have to run these events, right? This is so underrated when we think about the cash flow issues. And the next step is, okay, what happens if they default on these player contracts they can no longer fulfill because they don't have the cash to go pay out Travis Rettenmeier, which they owe a ton of money to, even though he's not really delivering that value? Well, that's a real problem, because if they default on that contract and they aren't able to pay, that gets around quick, right? Then Travis tells Elise Jones and his buddy DJ Young that they aren't paying him. They can't pay him. And they're like, shoot, I want my money before they aren't able to do this to me. And this creates essentially a bank run. And instead of a bank, it's just a corporate loan run, right? Everyone wants their money at the same time, and the PPA is none of it to go around because they don't have enough cash. All that to say, this is a very serious issue, and maybe one of the reasons why the PPA is on the brink of collapse. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? The PPA has done a tremendous job handling this so far. I'm not sure, they're a private company, so we don't have access to their financials. What I imagine they've done is they've gone and drawn on bank loans to be able to fulfill these contracts and these obligations from tour wars that they're still stuck in from a few years ago. And once these contracts expire, I guarantee you these pros, they're going to be suffering because they're not going to get this guarantee money to go play in the PPA Tour. And even if they are, it's going to be much less of a sum than they got a few years ago, because now all the leverage is in the hands of the PPA rather than the players. So if they can kind of survive until then, and until these media rights deals get bigger, and until the gambling comes into play, then they're going to be more than fine, right? They're going to be essentially a dynasty, monopoly in the pickleball space. But the question is, can they reach the light at the end of the tunnel? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time.